At my son's wedding, my daughter-in-law leaned in so close I could smell the champagne on her breath and spat. "You're just an ugly old parasite. Stay out of my sight." The string quartet never missed a note. Laughter chimed under the tent, glasses clinked, and the photographer kept snapping as if my world hadn't tilted an inch. I steadied the boutonniere on my son's lapel and smiled for the camera. If only she knew what I was hiding. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." The dress I wore was the same dove-gray silk I'd chosen for grace, not grandeur. She mistook it for weakness. She mistook my quiet for surrender. She didn't see the safe deposit key tucked behind the lining of my clutch, or the notarized papers folded beneath the handkerchief my husband gave me on our first anniversary. She didn't see the trust schedule, the deed addendum, or the final letter my husband left in a tidy blue envelope that began, "In case our son ever marries in haste." I kept my voice level, my posture tall. I thanked guests, hugged relatives, posed beside cake and candles while she preened for her bridesmaids, and practiced the kind of smile that looks like a warning. Let her have the spotlight, I thought. Spotlights burn hot and short. There is a kind of power that never raises its voice. It sits in signatures and dates, in account numbers and clauses, in the quiet certainty of ink that cannot be unsaid. Months earlier, I'd signed what needed signing and filed what needed filing. I knew exactly where everything was, and exactly who would be stunned when it surfaced. So I lifted my glass and toasted their future, meeting her eyes over the rim. She smirked. I smiled back, thinking of keys and envelopes, and the precise moment a curtain can drop with a whisper. But that night, something happened that changed everything. I should tell you who I am before I take you deeper into this story. My name hardly matters, you'll know me best. As a mother, a widow, and the woman my daughter-in-law thought she could destroy. I turned 65 last spring. My hair has gone mostly silver, and I've never hidden it with dyes or wigs. My husband used to say it looked like spun light when the sun caught it, and I wanted to keep it just as he remembered. He passed 3 years ago, leaving me with memories, a modest pension, and, as I would later discover, more than one surprise he had quietly prepared. Life after his death was quieter, lonelier. I filled my days with gardening, cooking, reading on the porch. My little house became my refuge. In the evenings, I would set a single place at the kitchen table, light a candle, and whisper a few words to him as though he still sat across from me. That ritual gave me comfort and reminded me of the life we had built together. My son, Daniel, was my pride. He had his father's height, my stubborn streak, and a smile that always disarmed me. I raised him to work hard, to value honesty, to treat others with respect. For years he lived by those lessons. Then he met her Rebecca. At first she seemed warm, considerate, even charming. She brought me flowers, called me Mom, and leaned in with stories of her own childhood. I wanted to believe her, to believe that Daniel had chosen someone who would love him deeply and respect the family he came from. But masks have a way of slipping. It started small. A sharp glance when I corrected her about a family recipe. A dismissive shrug when I offered advice about wedding plans. Once, I overheard her mutter under her breath, "She thinks she knows everything," while Daniel was out of earshot. I told myself to ignore it. That stress could make anyone short-tempered. After the engagement, though, her tone hardened. She decided the wedding would be at a grand estate outside town. Daniel had always dreamed of something modest, a backyard ceremony under the oak tree his father planted. But Rebecca laughed at that idea. "We're not having some cheap country picnic," she said one afternoon, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. I tried to defend Daniel's vision, but she dismissed me with a wave of her manicured hand. Times change. Traditions don't pay the bills. The more she planned, the more I felt pushed aside. Seating charts that left me at the far edge of the hall. Invitations designed without my input. She called me old-fashioned when I asked about including a family hymn. I could feel the distance between my son and me stretching wider, pulled taut by her careful manipulations. One evening, I found Daniel sitting at my kitchen table, scrolling through emails on his phone. "Mom," he said gently, "Rebecca just thinks we should keep things modern. Don't take it personally." His words stung more than he realized. I smiled and nodded, but inside I wondered how long it would be before he stopped defending me altogether. My house, once full of laughter, grew quiet. Visits became shorter, phone calls rarer. When they did come over, Rebecca would survey my modest living room with thinly veiled contempt. "It's cozy," she'd say, eyes flicking to the worn sofa, the family photos on the mantel. "You must be so attached to all this old stuff." She didn't understand or didn't care that each picture, each knick-knack carried decades of memory. The first real wound came during a Sunday dinner I had carefully prepared. Roast chicken, green beans, apple pie, Daniel's favorites. Rebecca picked at her plate and finally pushed it aside. "Too greasy," she announced. Then she added with a little laugh, "Maybe it's time you let younger people handle meals. Times are changing." Her words landed heavy on the table, and Daniel, caught between us, just looked down. I swallowed my hurt, cleared the dishes, and told myself not to cry in front of them. Over the months, Rebecca's comments sharpened into open contempt. She corrected me in front of others, rolled her eyes when I spoke, acted as though my age made me invisible. Sometimes I caught Daniel watching me, guilt in his eyes, but he rarely challenged her. I could see her influence tightening around him like a noose. Still, I held on to my dignity. I tended my garden, kept the house in order, and found solace in memories of my husband. He had always believed in preparing for the unexpected. He used to say, "Wealth isn't just money, it's foresight." At the time, I thought he meant our retirement savings and insurance policies. I didn't realize he meant more. Not yet. The cruelty escalated in subtle ways. She stopped including me in planning family events. She forgot to tell me about important appointments. At a family brunch, she leaned over to a cousin and whispered loudly enough for me to hear, "She's sweet, but not very useful anymore." That word useless cut deeper than any blade. I told myself to be patient, to wait, to remember that masks fall, and truth finds its way to the surface. But with each insult, each sideways glance, each manipulation, I felt the ground shift beneath me. Then came the wedding day. The words she spat in my face for everyone to hear. "Ugly old parasite." The venom in her tone made my chest ache. I forced myself to stand tall, to smile, to hold my head high. But inside, the wound festered. And that was only the beginning of her cruelty. After the wedding, life took on a new rhythm, one that pulsed with tension. I had thought perhaps her cruelty at the reception had been fueled by nerves, champagne, or the overwhelming spectacle of the day. But no, that venom wasn't a mistake. It was her truth finally slipping out into the open. The first weeks of their marriage, I tried to give them space. Newlyweds need time to settle, to find their footing. I told myself Daniel would call, would stop by, would remember the evenings we used to spend sharing dinner, just the two of us. But days stretched into weeks, and the silence between us became a wall. When I did call, it was Rebecca who answered most often. "Daniel's busy," she would say curtly, her tone dismissive, as though I were a stranger hawking a product over the phone. "I'll let him know you called." But he never returned those calls. When I did see them, Rebecca's eyes would roam over me with disdain. Once, at brunch with some of Daniel's colleagues, she introduced me not as his mother, but as Daniel's sweet old friend. A ripple of polite laughter circled the table, but I could feel my ears burning. Daniel's fork clinked against his plate, but he said nothing. Later, when I asked why he hadn't corrected her, he mumbled, "She didn't mean it, Mom. Don't overthink." But the truth was plain. Rebecca meant every word. The humiliations began piling up like stones in my chest. At a charity event, she maneuvered me to the back row of the group photo. At another dinner, she ordered me to fetch her a napkin, her tone sharp and commanding, as though I were her servant. Guests noticed, eyes flicking toward me with pity. I forced a smile, but inside my dignity cracked. I began to notice how she spoke to Daniel as well, not with love or tenderness, but with control-short commands, subtle barbs, cutting jokes dressed in sugar. He laughed them off, not realizing the way she was shaping him, molding him into someone who looked past cruelty instead of confronting it. I wanted to shake him, to remind him of the values his father had instilled, but my words would only widen the divide. One evening, they invited me over for dinner at their new house. It should have been a happy occasion, a fresh start. Instead, Rebecca treated me like an intruder. The table gleamed with crystal and silver, the air perfumed with expensive candles. Yet when I sat down, she leaned close and whispered, "Don't touch the china. It's worth more than your entire home." Her words landed like a slap. I kept my hands folded in my lap all through the meal. Later that night, as I put on my coat, I overheard her speaking to Daniel in the kitchen. Her voice was low but edged with steel. "We need to think about the future. She's old. She doesn't contribute. We can't be burdened by her forever." My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to storm in, to demand an explanation, but something in me said, "Not yet. Let her believe I am powerless. Let her underestimate me." The truth was, I wasn't powerless. Not entirely. For tucked away in a bank vault downtown, secured under my name alone, were the documents my husband had carefully prepared before his death. Deeds, trust accounts, investment records, proof that the fortune he had built over decades was not in Daniel's name, nor Rebecca's, it was in mine. He had always been cautious, always wary of opportunists. Perhaps he had seen something in Daniel's choices that worried him, or perhaps he simply trusted me more than anyone else. Either way, his foresight was the lifeline I hadn't yet revealed. Still, I stayed silent. Timing was everything. Reveal too early, and Rebecca would twist it, find some way to wriggle out. Reveal too late, and the damage to my relationship with Daniel might be beyond repair. So I waited, enduring insult after insult, letting her think she was tightening the noose. The cruelty escalated during family gatherings. At Thanksgiving, she deliberately forgot to set a place for me at the table. "Oh, I assumed you wouldn't eat much anyway," she said brightly, as if it were a reasonable mistake. At Christmas, she handed out lavish gifts to everyone: watches, handbags, jewelry, then gave me a single pot holder, still tagged from a clearance bin. Laughter erupted around the room and I felt my cheeks flame. Daniel looked uneasy, but again, said nothing. I began keeping a notebook, documenting every slight, every humiliation. Not because I planned to use it in court, though part of me wondered if I might one day, but because I needed a record. I needed to remind myself that this wasn't in my head, that the cruelty was real. Each entry steadied me, hardened me, reminded me that silence was not surrender but strategy. Then came the night that changed everything. They had hosted a dinner party for friends and colleagues. I was seated at the far end of the table, isolated. The conversation flowed around me, laughter and toasts, while Rebecca commanded the spotlight. At one point, she clinked her glass for attention. "I just want to say," she began, her eyes sweeping the room, "how grateful I am for my new family. Daniel is everything I dreamed of, and his mother," she paused, her lips curling, "well, she's a reminder that sometimes you inherit baggage along with blessings." The table erupted in uncomfortable chuckles. My hands clenched in my lap, nails digging into my skin to keep from trembling. That night, after the guests had gone and I had returned home, I unlocked the cedar box in my closet. Inside lay the safe deposit key, cool and heavy in my palm. I sat at my desk and stared at it for a long time. Then, with a steadiness I hadn't felt in months, I began to plan. The morning after that dinner party, I couldn't shake Rebecca's words. Baggage. That was what she called me, as though I were a useless trunk dragging behind my son, something to be discarded when inconvenient. I poured my coffee, hands trembling, and stared at the safe deposit key on the table. It caught the sunlight like a sliver of quiet power, a reminder that I was not helpless, no matter how much she wanted me to believe otherwise. I decided it was time to visit the bank. The next day, I dressed carefully, slacks pressed, blouse crisp, pearls at my throat. I wanted to feel composed, dignified, in control. The clerk recognized me and escorted me to the small private room where clients review their boxes. The metal box slid out with a grating sound, heavy with everything my husband had worked for. Inside, neatly organized in folders, was proof of the life we had built: property deeds, trust documents, stock portfolios, and a will that left no room for interpretation. My husband's handwriting stared back at me in looping ink. To my wife, with love and trust, for her to decide when the time is right. Tears pricked my eyes. He had known. Somehow, he had known I might face this battle alone, and he had armed me with the tools to fight. I copied what I needed, placed everything back in order, and left the bank with a new steadiness in my step. I had weapons now, not of violence, but of law and legacy. Still, I couldn't reveal them yet. Not until Rebecca's arrogance peaked high enough that her fall would be unforgettable. And fall she did, though not immediately. Her cruelty only sharpened. She began excluding me from family outings altogether. Photos appeared on social media. Daniel and Rebecca smiling at restaurants, vacationing on the coast, attending concerts without me. When I asked Daniel about it, he hesitated, then muttered, "Mom, Rebecca thinks it's best if we focus on our own life." The words gutted me, but I only nodded, lips pressed tight. I would not beg for scraps of affection from my own son. One Sunday, I decided to visit unannounced. I baked Daniel's favorite pie, apple with cinnamon crumble, and carried it warm to their doorstep. When Rebecca opened the door, her smile froze into a sneer. "You can't just show up whenever you like," she snapped. "This is our home. You need to call first." I held out the pie, but she didn't take it. Instead, she called over her shoulder, "Daniel, your mother's here again." Daniel appeared, his eyes darting between us. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly, almost apologetically. Rebecca folded her arms. "She brings things we don't need. It's clutter." My son looked at me, looked at the pie, and then sighed. "Maybe next time, Mom." My hand shook as I walked back to my car, pie still warm, untouched. That night, I placed the pie on my table and ate a slice alone. It tasted of ashes, not apples. But despair soon gave way to resolve. Rebecca wanted me small, invisible, erased. I would not give her that satisfaction. Instead, I began watching, listening, collecting. Every slight, every insult, every word, dripping with venom, I wrote it down. I also began to notice her patterns. Her spending habits grew reckless. Designer bags, sparkling jewelry, weekends away. I doubted Daniel's salary could cover it all. Was she dipping into joint accounts? Manipulating finances? I hired a discreet investigator, an old friend of my husband's. Within weeks, he brought me records. Credit card statements, transactions that didn't match Daniel's income. Rebecca was draining funds quickly, her appetite growing with each purchase. She thought no one was paying attention. She thought I was powerless. I wasn't. The final straw came on my birthday. Daniel had forgotten, or perhaps Rebecca had made sure he did. But she came, uninvited, with a smirk on her lips. In front of neighbors gathered for a small tea, she handed me a gift bag. Inside was a box of wrinkle cream, cheap and garishly packaged. "You'll need this," she said, laughter bubbling from her throat. The room went silent. My hands trembled, but not from hurt, from fury. That night, I opened the cedar box again, spreading the copied documents across my table. I ran my fingers over the signatures, the notary stamps, the embossed seals of ownership. Everything our home, the investments, the trust fund, was mine to reveal when I chose. Rebecca thought she had stripped me of dignity, family, and respect. What she didn't know was that I held the power to strip her of the one thing she valued most: control. And so, I began to plan her undoing. The opportunity arrived faster than I expected. They decided to host a grand dinner, a celebration of their 6-month anniversary. Guests from Daniel's office, extended family, friends, everyone would be there. Rebecca wanted to show off her role as the new matriarch, the glittering hostess. It was, I realized, the perfect stage. I accepted the invitation with a polite smile. She thought she was summoning me for humiliation. In truth, she was setting the stage for her own downfall. That evening, I stood before my mirror, fastening the string of pearls my husband had given me on our 20th anniversary. I touched the envelope in my purse, the one that carried the copied deeds and trust documents. My reflection stared back, silver hair, lined face, but eyes alight with quiet fire. "Tonight," I whispered to the empty room, "she learns who the parasite really is." The night of their 6-month anniversary dinner, the air smelled of roses and roasted lamb. The house gleamed with polished silver, crystal glasses, and candles that flickered like tiny watchful eyes. Rebecca floated through the room in a sequined gown, her voice pitched high with laughter, her hands fluttering as she greeted guests. She looked every bit the queen of the evening. I arrived on time, dressed in a dark navy dress that skimmed my ankles, pearls at my throat, and my husband's letter tucked carefully in my handbag. The papers, copies of the deeds, the trust documents, the investment accounts lay inside a crisp folder. I pressed my hand against it as I stepped through the doorway. Power is not always loud. Sometimes it rests quietly in a woman's purse. "Mother," Rebecca said, lips tightening around the word as though it soured her tongue. "You came. I was almost certain you'd be too tired for a night like this." Her eyes swept over me, from my shoes to my hair, searching for weakness. I smiled. I wouldn't miss it. The evening unfolded much as I expected. Rebecca performed for the guests, spinning tales of her cleverness, her taste, her ambition. She placed me at the far end of the table again, close enough to serve as a prop, but too distant for conversation. I listened quietly, letting her arrogance rise, letting the room watch her posture grow taller and taller on the shaky stilts of contempt. When dessert was served, she seized her moment. She clinked her glass, drawing attention. "I must say," she began, voice syrupy, "marriage has been everything I dreamed. Daniel and I have built a beautiful home, surrounded by friends and success, and we couldn't have done it without the sacrifices of family." She paused, turning her gaze toward me, her smile sharpening. "Some of us cling to the past. Some of us rely on others more than we should. But Daniel and I, we've worked hard. We've earned this." Laughter rippled uncertainly around the table. My face burned, but not with shame, with readiness. I dabbed my lips with my napkin and rose to my feet. The room quieted. "It's true," I said, my voice calm. "Family is the foundation of everything, and sacrifices, well, they should never be forgotten." Rebecca's smile faltered. "Yes, well, of course. Sacrifices are important." I reached into my handbag. "Speaking of sacrifices," I continued, "there's something I've been keeping safe. Something my husband left behind, long before he passed." I slid the folder onto the table, flipping it open with deliberate care. Gasps echoed as the guests leaned closer. The embossed seals, the notarized stamps, the bold black letters of ownership stared back. "These," I said, "are the deeds to this house. The trust accounts that fund it, the investments that sustain it, all placed in my name. Not Daniel's, not Rebecca's, mine." The silence was thick, broken only by the clatter of a fork slipping from someone's hand. Rebecca's face drained of color. That can't be." "It can," I interrupted. "And it is. My husband trusted me to safeguard everything he built. He wrote in his own hand that these assets remain under my control until I deem otherwise." I lifted the letter, my husband's neat script clear under the light. He saw further than any of us. He knew there might come a day when legacy would be threatened by greed. Daniel stared, his jaw slack. "Mom, why didn't you—" "I waited," I said softly. "I waited until the moment was right. Me." Rebecca's chair scraped back as she lurched to her feet. "This is ridiculous. She's making it up. She forged them." But the lawyer I had invited, my husband's old friend, rose from his seat in the corner. "I can confirm," he said firmly. "These are authentic. I notarized several myself. Everything is valid and binding." Murmurs spread around the table. Eyes turned from Rebecca to me, then back again, measuring, recalculating. The queen of the evening was suddenly stripped bare. Rebecca's hands shook. "Daniel, say something. Tell her this isn't fair. This is supposed to be ours." Daniel looked at me, then at the documents, then back at his wife. His voice was quiet, uncertain. "Rebecca, I don't know what to say." Her mask cracked. "You don't know what to say? She's ruining us. She's revealing the truth." I cut in. My voice was low but steady, sharp enough to slice the silence. "The truth you tried so hard to bury under insults and humiliation." And Sav. The room held its breath. Rebecca's mouth opened and closed, words dying in her throat. For the first time, she had nothing to say. I gathered the documents, slid them back into my folder, and straightened. "Enjoy your dessert," I told the guests. And remember, arrogance is temporary. Legacy is permanent. I left them there, stunned in the glow of candles and shame. The following days, whispers rippled through the family, through Daniel's colleagues, through every circle Rebecca had tried to impress. She was no longer the radiant hostess, no longer the sparkling bride. She was the woman who had been publicly unmasked, the woman whose sneers hid desperation, not power. Daniel came to me a week later, his face drawn. "Mom," he said, "why didn't you tell me sooner? Would you have believed me?" I asked gently. His silence was answer enough. I placed my hand on his. "Son, I love you, but you need to see people for who they are, not just who they pretend to be." Rebecca tried to fight. She screamed, argued, demanded access to accounts that were not hers, but every path she took led back to me. The law was ironclad, my husband's foresight unshakable, and so I began preparing for the next step, not just revealing the secret, but deciding what to do with it. Would I tighten the reins and cut them off entirely? Would I offer Daniel a chance to redeem himself while leaving Rebecca in the cold? The choice lay with me, and for the first time in months, I felt the weight shift back into my hands. I walked through my garden, the roses blooming red against the green. My husband had always loved them. "I'll protect what you left me," I whispered to the air, "and I'll make sure she never forgets the day she tried to humiliate me." For revenge, I realized, is not only about the reveal, it is about what follows how you wield the truth once it is laid bare. And my next move was already forming. We gathered in a walnut-paneled conference room at my husband's old law firm, the same place where we had signed our first mortgage decades ago. The table was long and glossy, the air cool with the hiss of a vent, and a tray of untouched water bottles lined up like sentries. My lawyer, Mr. Waller, sat to my right with a slim stack of binders. Beside him waited a court reporter, headphones on, fingers poised above a stenotype. This would not be a shouting match in someone's living room. This would be a record. Daniel came first, pale and tight-jawed. He nodded to me, then stared at the spiral in the wood grain as if it could tell him what to do. Rebecca swept in a minute later in a white sheath dress, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. She set her phone face up on the table, already recording. "What is this?" she asked, lips barely moving. "Some dramatic stunt?" "It's a clarification," I said. "About the house, about the trust, about your access to either." "I do." She snorted and took a chair opposite me. "My access? You mean our access. We're family." Mr. Waller opened the first binder. "For the record," he said, voice smooth, "today's meeting concerns the administration of the Whitaker Family Trust, the license to occupy the property on Ashcroft, and related matters of financial conduct." Rebecca's smile thinned. "License to occupy? The house is owned by the trust," Mr. Waller continued. "My client holds all dispositive powers. Occupancy is a revocable license granted at her discretion, subject to conditions." She laughed, a brittle sound that pinged off the glass walls. "Subject to what?" "Table manners." "Civility, actually," I said. "And transparency." "Civility," she repeated, as if tasting something sour. "Right, from the woman who ambushed me at dinner." Mr. Waller slid a document across the table. "These are the trust terms, signed and notarized. And this," he added, tapping a tabbed page, "is a notice of revocation of license, held in abeyance pending today's discussion." Daniel straightened. "Revocation? Mom." I touched his sleeve. "Let us finish." The first twist was simple. Mr. Waller lifted an exhibit sleeve and held up a glossy page. "Credit card statements," he said. "A series of charges totaling $82,000 over 5 months. Jewelry, luxury travel, designer accessories. The card is in Daniel's name, but the merchant videos and signatures belong to Rebecca." Rebecca didn't blink. "Married people share expenses. Welcome to adulthood." "Married people share decisions," I said. "You hid these from him." She rolled her eyes. "He knew." He approved. Mr. Waller nodded to the door. It opened, and my investigator stepped in. Trim suit, calm eyes. He placed a small stack of printouts on the table. "These are the authorization screens from the boutique purchases," he said. They require dual-factor approval. Daniel's phone was geolocated at the hospital for all 8 hours of his shift on 3 of those days. His device never pinged those prompts. Someone intercepted the SMS backups tied to the shared plan. Rebecca's jaw flickered. So what? Maybe he forgot. Maybe he told me to. I bry. Or maybe, the investigator said evenly, you changed the recovery number on the shared plan for 48 hours each time and changed it back. The carrier logs reflect that pattern. Daniel looked stricken. Rebecca? Did you do that? She stared at him, at the logs, then smiled without warmth. If I did, it was to keep us afloat while your mother withheld what should be ours. Mr. Waller's pen clicked once. The trust has never been yours. I opened a second folder and slid a letter across the table. My husband's handwriting filled the page in his measured script. He wrote this as a letter of wishes, I said quietly. Not legally binding, but clear in intent. He asked me to keep the trust segregated from marital claims and to protect you, Daniel, from pressure you might not recognize. He saw this coming. Daniel read the first lines and blinked hard. Rebecca didn't touch it. Next, Mr. Waller said, the prenuptial agreement. The word landed like a dropped stone. Daniel's head snapped up. A prenup? Rebecca's laugh was too loud. There is no prenup. We didn't sign one. Mr. Waller slid a slim folder toward her. You did. 2 days before the wedding, after your rehearsal dinner, at this office. You both signed before a notary. She didn't even look. That's absurd. The court reporter's soft keys tapped like rain. Mr. Waller turned a page and read, Section 7.6, Spousal Waiver of Claims, in separate property trusts. The parties agree that neither shall assert any present or future claim against assets held in any separate property trust established by a parent of either party. The parties acknowledge full understanding and independent counsel. Rebecca's lips parted, then closed. I never had independent counsel. The signature page shows your attorney's bar number, Mr. Waller replied. You initialed the clause. She snatched the folder at last. Her eyes scanned the dense text, then shot to the signature line. There, in crisp blue, sat her name beside a perfectly matching initial on every page. The color drained from her face. You tricked me, she said. You shoved this in at the last minute. You insisted the wedding be at a grand estate, I said. My husband insisted on prudence. Daniel agreed to meet him in the middle. You both signed. No one tricked you. I paused. But you did try to trick the rest of us. Mr. Waller switched binders. We also have evidence of defamatory statements directed at my client, made publicly and repeatedly. He played a short audio clip from the rehearsal dinner, captured by the venue's service hallway camera. Rebecca's voice drifted through, unmistakable. She's poor, washed up, and I'll make sure she stays in the shadows once we move in. The room went very still. As a rule, Mr. Waller continued, trusts are insulated, but reputation is not. My client has options. Rebecca scraped her chair back. Enough. This is character assassination. Give us what's due and stop playing queen. I folded my hands. You called me an ugly old parasite at my son's wedding. You moved me to the back of photographs, erased me from invitations, turned my son away from his own mother, and siphoned funds while he worked night shifts. What's due is a reckoning. Daniel's voice was hoarse. Rebecca, did you really say those things? She didn't answer him. She looked at me, and in that look I saw the raw thing beneath the polish. The certainty that entitlement was power, that cruelty was proof of strength. Here is what I propose, I said. Effective immediately. The house license is suspended. You will vacate within 30 days. Daniel may remain as my guest while we determine next steps. You will return the items purchased with fraudulently approved funds or reimburse the account. If you contest, I will proceed with civil action and a restraining order. If you comply, I will refrain from public comment outside this record. Rebecca's mouth curled. You think you can erase me with a deadline? I think you've erased yourself with your behavior, I said. I'm simply writing it down. She leaned in, voice low. You're old. Time is not on your side. Men don't like women who wage war. Daniel will choose, and he won't choose you. Daniel's chair scraped loudly. Stop talking like I'm a prize. He looked at me, eyes raw. Mom, I don't know how we got here, but I'm sorry. Rebecca turned sharply toward him. Don't you dare. The door opened. The court reporter looked up as Mr. Waller's assistant stepped in carrying a padded envelope. This was just delivered by courier, she said. Addressed to Miss Whitaker. From a safety deposit archive. My breath caught. Mr. Waller opened the envelope and slid out a flash drive and a single-page note in my husband's handwriting. He read the first line and looked at me. It's a video, he said softly. Recorded 6 months before he died. Rebecca's bravado wavered. What is it? Mr. Waller connected the drive to a small monitor. The screen flickered, then resolved into my husband's face, older and tired but clear-eyed, seated at this very table. He said my name. Then he said Daniel's. Then he said, if you're watching this, it means there has been confusion about the trust, and perhaps about character. The room held its breath. Shall I press play from the top? Mr. Waller asked. Do it, I said. The screen brightened. My husband leaned in, ready to speak to all of us across time. The room seemed to shrink as the video played. My husband sat at the long walnut table, the same one where we now sat in tense silence. His eyes were tired but steady, his voice low and deliberate. Daniel, if you're watching this, you are older now than when we recorded this. I trust you are working hard, as you always promised you would. But I also know how easily people are swayed by charm, by beauty, by the illusion of success. A marriage is a partnership, but it should never be a prison. Remember who raised you. Remember the values I taught you. Daniel shifted in his chair, his face pale, his jaw tight. My husband's gaze turned to the camera again. And if there is conflict about the trust, let me make this plain. Everything I leave, every deed, every account belongs first to your mother. She earned it as much as I did. She stood beside me when we had nothing, and she deserves peace in her years. No one, no spouse, no relative has the right to strip her of that dignity. Daniel, if your wife respects you, she will respect your mother. If she does not, then she does not respect you. The silence that followed was unbearable. Rebecca sat frozen, her knuckles white against the edge of the table. The video ended with my husband lifting his hand in a small wave, a gesture he had always made at the end of his letters. Then the screen went black. I drew a breath. That, I said quietly, is the man whose name you have been living under. And those are his wishes. Wishes I intend to honor. Rebecca broke first. She shoved back her chair and stood, her voice high, brittle. This is manipulation. He's not here to defend himself. She's using his words to control everything. Daniel, you can't let her do this. But Daniel didn't move toward her. He stared at the blank screen, eyes glassy, then looked at me. Dad wouldn't have done this lightly, he said, almost to himself. If he recorded that, he meant it. Rebecca's face twisted. So what? You're going to let her make all the decisions? You're a grown man, Daniel. You don't need your mother's permission to live your life. Finally, Daniel looked at her directly. What I need, he said, voice steady, is respect for my family. And you've shown none. Her mouth opened, closed. Fury darkened her face, but she said nothing. Mr. Waller cleared his throat, folding the letter back into the envelope. For the record, the settler's intent is clear. The trust will remain under Mrs. Whitaker's control. The prenuptial agreement prevents any claim. Any further disputes will be met with litigation. Rebecca's composure cracked. Litigation? She spat. You think you can drag me into court? I'll destroy you in front of everyone we know. I rose slowly, steadying my palms on the table. You've already destroyed yourself, I said. Every insult, every humiliation you dealt me, I endured it. I recorded it. And now, everyone sees who you really are. She glared at me, her chest rising and falling in quick, shallow breaths. You're an old woman clinging to scraps of power. You think this makes you strong? I met her eyes, calm as the sea before a storm. What makes me strong is knowing I don't need to lower myself to cruelty to prove it. For the first time, she looked small. Daniel spoke again, his voice breaking. Rebecca, I can't do this anymore. Her head snapped toward him. What are you saying? I'm saying this marriage, this life we've been living, it's built on lies and manipulation. Dad saw it. Mom warned me. And I refused to listen. But I can't ignore it anymore. Rebecca's lips trembled. She grabbed her phone, her purse, and without another word stormed out of the conference room, her heels clicking like hammers down the hallway. The door slammed behind her. The silence that followed was deep, almost reverent. I felt the weight lift off my chest, a pressure I hadn't realized I had carried for months. Daniel lowered his head into his hands, shoulders shaking. I placed a hand on his arm. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. "I should have seen sooner." Tears pricked my eyes, but I kept my voice steady. "You see now. That's what matters." Mr. Waller closed the files with a decisive snap. "I believe that concludes this meeting." As we left the room, I felt the cool air on my face, fresh and liberating. The secret I had carried for so long was no longer hidden. The truth had cut through the lies. And Rebecca, so smug, so cruel, so certain of her triumph, was gone, left with nothing but the echo of her own insults. The weeks after the confrontation felt like stepping out of a storm into sunlight. For months, I had lived under Rebecca's shadow, her sharp words, her humiliations, her manipulations, but now, the air in my home was lighter, easier to breathe. Rebecca moved out of the Ashcroft house within the 30 days outlined in the agreement. She left behind a trail of unpaid bills and bitter words, but no one followed her. The family, Daniel's colleagues, even her own acquaintances had seen the truth revealed. Where once she had basked in whispers of admiration, now she was spoken of in hushed tones, her arrogance remembered only as a cautionary tale. Daniel stayed behind at the house, unsure of his next steps. He spent long evenings with me, sitting at my kitchen table, piecing through the fragments of his marriage. At first, the silence between us was heavy. He was ashamed, though he didn't say it outright. One night, he finally found the words. "I let her blind me," he admitted, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. "She made me believe you were the problem. I let her turn me against you." I reached across the table, covering his hand with mine. "You were in love, Daniel. Love makes us see what we want to see. Don't carry the weight of her choices." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Mom." For the first time in months, I felt the warmth of my son's sincerity, unclouded by her voice. It was a wound beginning to heal. Life didn't become perfect overnight, but the balance shifted. Daniel began rebuilding his life with honesty. He sought counseling, threw himself into work, and slowly reconnected with friends he had drifted from under Rebecca's control. As for me, I found peace in my routines again, gardening in the mornings, reading on the porch at dusk, tending roses my husband once planted with his bare hands. They bloomed brighter than I remembered, as if nourished by justice itself. The documents remained in the vault, secure and untouched. I didn't flaunt them, didn't wave them like a banner. Their power wasn't in the paper itself, but in the reminder that foresight and patience could outlast cruelty. My husband had trusted me to safeguard his legacy, and I had done so. One evening, as the sun melted into gold across the horizon, I sat on the porch with Daniel. He watched the light fade, his expression soft. "Dad would have been proud of you," he said quietly. I looked up at the first star flickering in the sky. "I only did what had to be done." "No," Daniel insisted. "You stood tall when she tried to break you. You reminded me what integrity looks like. That's strength." Tears slipped down my cheeks, but they were warm, not bitter. "I miss him every day," I admitted. "But I think he would have liked how this ended." Rebecca tried, in the weeks after leaving, to stir trouble-snide posts online, claims of betrayal, even a threat of legal action. But with the prenup, the video, and the notarized trust documents, her noise dissolved into nothing. People stopped listening. One by one, doors closed on her. She had lost her audience, and I had regained my dignity. As summer deepened, I began to host small gatherings again. Cousins came by with casseroles. Neighbors dropped in for tea. Children played in the yard without whispers of tension in the air. My home felt alive, not haunted. Sometimes, when I walk through the garden at dusk, I think back to that moment at the wedding when she leaned in and spat her venom in my ear. Ugly old parasite. The words that once stung like acid now feel hollow. They were never true. They were only the desperate attempt of someone who thought cruelty could replace character. I know now that revenge isn't about shouting the loudest or striking the hardest. It's about patience, timing, and letting the truth do its work. As the stars blink awake each night, I whisper to the memory of my husband, I kept your legacy safe. I kept our son safe, and I am still standing. And in the quiet rustle of the roses, I almost hear him answer. Tell me what you think in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story I have to tell might be even more unbelievable than this one.